I found Andy Lloyd fascinating, and I'm not just saying that because he's remained on the line. I know he can hear us, because he is sticking about for the next conversation that we're going to have. It's interlinked. The people that we're going to speak to have worked together, and there are threads going through all of this. This has been playing out on the ground, but delighted to welcome Mary Montague, who is from Mediators Beyond Borders. What's interesting about that organisation itself, I was looking at the map where you work, and if you look at where all the pins are, where it operates, Sierra Leone, Yemen, Uganda, Myanmar, Colombia, you guys know a thing or two about conflict, traumatized communities. So we're very much looking forward to the discussion we're about to have. And we said this was an international event. We've been as far as Melbourne, let's go around the other way now, to Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, and welcome Judge Mike Lucas from the Court of Common Pleas of Washington County, Pennsylvania. Good morning to you, sir. I was saying to you earlier when I first saw you, you look exactly how I imagine a judge in Pennsylvania would look. So thank you for making the aesthetic effort, if nothing else.
Well, I don't know that anyone would say I'm out of central casting, but I certainly appreciate the compliment.
Well, look, let's talk then. Mary, something that Oregon Co. has written about. We heard from him earlier, and we didn't get time to discuss it, but I know it's an area that comes up in your work around restorative practices. That is a much greater area than restorative justice. I know that, and we'll explain that. That's why we are going to talk. But can I start you off talking about this issue of shame? Yes. Awkwardness among people, when we are expecting them to have tough conversations, hard, honest dialogues. How often does shame come up?
Yeah. I suppose when we talk about shame, particularly around sort of restorative justice, restorative practices, we have to maybe step back in ourselves and say, where did I experience a sense of shame? And when I was growing up, for example, in my home, my mum was a disciplinarian. And yet, when you did something wrong, she would at times, if it really went to her beyond the pale, she would say, go you upstairs, sit in the bedroom, wait till your father comes home. And how did that make me feel? And it was a form of shame. And in restorative practices, what we're saying is, we're not saying the sense of shame should be something that degrades the person, but it brings about within ourselves a reflection about what it is we have done and what has the impact been on others.
But aren't you then going into the area of also guilt and humiliation, and they are tough emotions to ask people to deal with and process?
And that's how facilitation skills are key in restorative work, because in our facilitation we change our language. So we're asking people about what is the impact on others, and what is the impact on yourself, and what is the learning from this, and how do you restore the situation and the relationship that you've maybe hurt or harmed. So we're moving towards solution-based work and a learning for those involved.
Well, tell us then, I'm going to step back at this point, tell us a little bit about the work that you've been doing and the cooperation that you've made with Judge Lucas. And I know you two have some shared thoughts on that. But just begin with what has the activity been? Okay.
So I suppose for our story, we could start, Judge Lucas, at the fact that what we aimed to do was bring restorative practice into the family courts and the whole family services within the Washington, Pennsylvania area. And this is a place about 30 miles from Pittsburgh. And it has been part of that huge industrial landscape of Pittsburgh. I had the privilege to be a visiting professor at the college that you used to go to, Judge Lucas, Washington and Jefferson. And at that college, there was the motto of Together We Thrive. In my work there, which was lecturing on mediation and restorative practices, I wanted students, if you remember, to have that experiential learning. And so I invited my students to come out of the classroom, to move out into the community and community organisations with this methodology. And one of the places that we ended up coming to was yourself, but that came about through our very first encounter, because in good community development terms and in restorative terms, we held a circle. We held these tables, these round tables, asking people from the community, from the services, what is the context, what are the challenges, and listening, basically, to what was happening in the area. And you attended one of those. So can you share with me what that experience was like?
Well, I recall it vividly. It was in the basement of what was the dining hall at Washington and Jefferson College. And we had individuals not only from the court system in Washington County, but also from county government, as well as other stakeholders. We have a lot of nonprofit corporation participation in human services in Washington County. So we had a child advocates group there. We had a group that has focused on poverty and building self-sufficiency there. You had the school district there. It was a remarkable evening because of the number of people assembled there. What struck me was the manner in which Mary conducted the session. It was, first off, quite calm. Secondly, there was little disagreement, but there was a lot of vigorous discussion. And it showed me, as someone who had not been exposed to these methods, the benefit that you could get by simply sitting around and listening.
Thank you. And just on that method, just for the programme, what we actually were using at each of those tables was restorative circles. And circles yield a certain form of dialogue that is very much more open and honest. And also it really gave us in the college a full picture of what the struggle was for families and the communities and the courts at that time. I mean, my learning comes from my peace building work here in the north of Ireland, and also from the work that we did in Leeds. And I'm still amazed by the mystic happening when you get people in a circle where there's respect shown and listening, respectful listenings to the fore. So you felt out of that things had to change, or you were already feeling that, Judge Lucas. Can you tell us why you felt family services had to change?
Well, Mary, I'm going to try to give you a history that could probably distill or take a long period of time. But let me first start by saying that Washington, Pennsylvania was the seat of the first open rebellion in the United States. It was known as the Whiskey Rebellion. And that spirit is alive and well in Washington County. We tend to have a fierce sense of independence, and there is a lot of parochialism. What I came into was a system that had gone through a lot of controversy and conflict between the court system and county government. And we suffered from a lack of trust, a lack of open communication, and a lack of cooperation. Now, the idea of restorative practice had been alive and well in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for some time. Justice Max Baer with our Pennsylvania Supreme Court has been attempting for 2 decades to radically change the family court system in Pennsylvania from one where it is adversarial and every outcome is litigated to one where outcomes are facilitated. But unfortunately in Washington County, what happened to Justice Baer is he came in to mediate the dispute between the court and county officials. And in that process, the people on the ground no longer wanted to implement those restorative practices. They viewed it as something top-down coming from the Supreme Court. So our challenge became, how do we show the benefit of these processes and eliminate the stigma that individuals were placing on it? And Mary, you did that in the first meeting with our Children's Roundtable, where we had not only court officials and county officials, but also attorneys and other service providers in our system present. And you conducted the very same thing. We put everyone in a circle and we started to talk about the frustrations and the problems that we were encountering. And in the organic way that you do that, Mary, which is exceptional, you showed us how we could work together. And that occurred about 6.5 years ago. And we continued it. We had a lot of pitfalls, a lot of problems, a lot of stops and starts. But we are finally reaching a point where we are beginning to implement restorative practices early for our families here in Washington County. But oddly enough, we had to first use those practices with ourselves. Kim Rogers, who was the director of child services at that time, she conducted family group sessions with her staff, largely because she felt within her own office, they had divisions, they had much conflict, and we did it system-wide as well. So what we have now transitioned to is a model whereby we're trying to get family group decision-making, and most importantly, the sense of empowerment in families who are challenged early, and have them married up with service providers who are coming in not as being imposed by a judge like myself or by county officials, but are coming in saying, we recognize that there's a problem here. Here's what we have to offer you. I think that that approach now is beginning to show itself in terms of numbers in the county, the hard data. But anecdotally, I will say that when I have discussions with other judges who work in the family courts here in Washington County, they're attempting to steer as many of these cases towards family group decision-making in these types of models. I think we as judges recognize that though we're trained well and we all feel that we do a competent job, we can never envision an outcome that is as palatable and as good for a family as the one a family that works together could come up with.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Judge. And I remember when the whole staff and your colleagues all came up to Washington and Jefferson College to us, and we did a day of training and we did some strategic planning as well. But in the midst of all of that, I got a great sense of people feeling this has to happen. There was a must in the action, and you got that sense in the room. Equally, I think I also got a very great sense while I worked alongside you about your leadership, because change within institutions, that doesn't come about unless it's really positive leadership. So can we talk a little bit about the leader's role when you're working towards such fundamental change?
Sure. I think the first thing to recognize, and for me that was very easy, Mary, is that you have to know which questions to ask. You also have to be willing to demonstrate that you don't have all the answers. So what we did is we conducted quarterly meetings with the Children's Roundtable. And we recognized that those meetings that would occur once every 3 months for a few hours simply were not enough. And we implemented it, as you just mentioned, a strategic planning approach whereby we did a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. And we went around the room and we broke up into smaller groups because our roundtable had grown to 30 people. And we wanted everyone to participate. That's difficult for some individuals when you have 30 there to have a voice. So we broke up into small groups and came back and shared those ideas. And what we recognized was that organically, or almost indigenously, what we were focusing on was coming up with exactly what restorative practice has been saying the evidence proves to be effective. And that is, we need earlier intervention that does not necessarily mandate an outcome, but tries to facilitate outcomes. And we are now off the ground with what we call a rapid response protocol, whereby if a family is identified as being at risk due to neglect or abuse of a child, they're seeing a family group facilitator within about a week. And the hope is at that point is that enough supports can be brought in, the child's network can be identified such that we do not remove that child, or if we do remove that child, we're not placing the child into stranger care. The child's going with someone who they have an established relationship with and who also would support reunification with the parents. That has been a struggle for us here in Washington County since I came on the bench. And this is the first time I really feel that we're kind of moving forward and we're seeing some data that bears out the efficacy of this approach.
Thanks, Judge Lucas. I'd like to bring in sort of the systems around the family courts as well, because from Washington and Jefferson College, we also, alongside myself, the students came out and we actually trained 150 school teachers in all the local schools around, because we are talking about a whole systems change. And obviously the school system links into the family services and the family courts. And I really believe in systems change. How difficult do you feel it is to see systems change within big institutions, and what really helps?
Well, part of it is structural, Mary. In Pennsylvania, and specifically here in Washington County, we're not dealing with one single school district. There is a strong tradition in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for local control of school districts. So in Washington County, we have about a dozen different school districts that have a different structure in terms of individuals on school boards who control their policy making. It remains a challenge for us to coordinate with schools. Because of the fact that you can have a change in board, you can have a change in leadership, and all of a sudden all the good work that you've done has gone by the board. However, we are making that effort now on a countywide basis through what we call a human services umbrella. And instead of having each different human services agency in county government in their separate silo, we now have one agency director. That is Ms. Rogers, who I spoke about earlier. And she recognizes that, there is a great deal of duplication of services going across lines, and that we now need to go out into these communities and embrace them and try to coordinate our services. In the area where I live, which is the Rust Belt portion of the county, we were a very big steel making and coal making region at one time. Those communities tend to be very impoverished, lower on the socioeconomic scale. So the effort has been to bring agency presence into those communities, one for accessibility, but also to build those relationships within the community that, I like to say that when you're present in the community and you're part of it, there's a natural efficiency to your mission. When you run into and talk to someone who may be working at the school district, and all of a sudden the conversation naturally leads to an issue that the two of you may have to deal with, a problem you may have to deal with, it's amazing how many things in terms of information and assistance you can gain when those relationships are built. So that's really the effort here, is to build those relationships, not to have a top-down approach, but to be embedded within the communities.
So what I'm going to sum that up as being is a compassionate approach. For me, compassion is just embedded in restorative practice, Judge Lucas, through the listening, through walking alongside people, doing things with people rather than to and for, as Andy was saying earlier in his presentation, truly respecting the innate wisdom, really, of individuals, families and communities. And I think the other lovely thing for me, working alongside you and working alongside your staff, is that we envisioned a change together with the communities and with families and with the children in the schools. And as I said at the start, the theme of the motto for Washington and Jefferson College was "Together we thrive." And I think that's what's happening today in Washington because of your work. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, Mary, and thank you for all the great assistance and how you led us to this. I don't think we could have done this without you. I've talked to Justice Baer's staff from time to time and jokingly said that I had to bring in an international mediator to assist us in using some of these established practices. But I don't think we could have done this without your leadership and your assistance for that 2-year period you were here in Washington. And I have to say, we all miss you and Patty very much.
Thank you.
It's been lovely having you with us, Judge Lucas. Just before you go, a quick thing from me. Could you tell us, today in Washington County, as a result of the work that you've been doing, what is the one tangible difference that is in your community as a result of all this? And what is the one difference that all this has made to you as a judge and the work you do on a daily basis?
Well, the tangible difference is seen in numbers. We started the rapid response program last year, and in many of those instances, there were 44 referrals. Those cases would have all come into a courtroom where a judge would have been determining where to place the child. Instead, what we now have is a circumstance where well over half of those families were accepted for services, but they were not broken up. And in the United States, as I would anticipate in the UK, when you come into a courtroom, it's an adversarial proceeding. And there's a winner, there's a loser. When you can facilitate these outcomes, there's a better chance that we have a win-win approach. And I think there's a better chance for us to have a more accurate read on what's happening. So in seeing a decrease in numbers of cases coming in, and also in seeing that families are staying together, I think is the chief benefit of this.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm sure there are lots of people who are also going to talk to you today who will be less delighted to be talking to you. Such is the nature of being a judge. But we are certainly thrilled to have linked up with you in Washington County. All the very best to you.
Best to you as well.
That's Judge Mike Lucas. Mary Montague, thank you very much indeed. A real delight having you here.